Yeah? All right. Well, welcome. My name's Matt Bartoldus. I'm with consultancy out of London and New York called Gotham Digital Science, and I'm coming down from our London office. Before I talk to anyone, I always like to know who I'm talking to, so that way there's some relevancy there. So I'm just going to do a quick survey of the dozen of you or so out there, and just to see where we fall. So a quick show of hands, how you would categorize yourself. You know, who in the room is more on the assessment side? So security audit, pen test, code review type stuff. Okay, so almost half the room-ish. Any developers in the room? IT architects?
20 years ago?
Sure, why not? In the past. Yeah, maybe I should buy, for some of you guys, which decade, but anyway. Any management, app owners type people? Yeah, okay. And then consultants? Okay. Which is pretty much expected, obviously. Okay, well, how about any others? And what's that? Just random stuff or any other like
everything on that list plus stuff that's on.
All right, bit of everything. So, good. What is anyone in the room here a non-security professional? So just here checking it out. Great. So today I get to unload all my frustrations on you. Talk about war stories and such. So through all that, I'm going to talk about security in the SDLC and some of the things that I've come across with my clients, working with them on that. And I recognize a few faces. I spoke here last year, and I spoke on the Software Assurance Maturity Model, OpenSAM, which is now an OWASP project. So I guess you can consider this a kind of a 1 year on in terms of working with clients, actually doing stuff with it on the ground. But a lot of this will come through more than just the past year, as you'll get going. So I'll just go right into it. So setting the framework of kind of where we are. Well, what is all this? And we have to remember that, like in the keynote this morning, I mean, we're in a very young industry, like someone mentioned something about all the stuff that's happened since 1995, Compare that to finance and accounting, and it's like a blip in insurance, in terms of an industry. And this is demonstrated by a focus, and I wanted to do a slide or a drawing, but I'm afraid I'd get in a lot of trouble with you all here around what I'd love to do is this presentation of data around the curve, so to speak, popularity curve of, say, like PBX hacking, right? So like in the, in the early days, war games or whatever, and it goes up, but then it kind of goes away, and then infrastructure takes over, and that goes up. But then infrastructure hacking kind of gave way, went down, and then all the rage was about getting to the databases through apps. And then now, application hacking and OWASP top 10 and all that. And it'd be good to kind of line that up with, so in the early days, PBX hack didn't get a lot of press. Financial losses weren't as significant and such. But then as you kind of go through this, nowadays, you can't have a good hack go on without, or a good breach go on without media attention. And this is really highlighted in the UK, where every week you get a new, they love reporting on data breaches, data loss, USB sticks lost, that kind of thing. They love it. And it's every week embarrassing, all sorts of organizations. But it's still very young. And the whole PCI just highlights this as well. So back in the day, it used to be the Cardholder Information Security Program. And I remember doing an audit against that, against an ISP. And anything to do with application development, it wasn't even mentioned. It was just this little side note around change control. whereas now it's a whole area within PCI. So that's just to put context around how young this really is. And so when we go and talk to my clients, we see this a lot, don't we? No time, I don't have the skills, we don't have the budget, right? I mean, we see this everywhere. We can even do a survey on which excuse you get the most, you know. So what I do is I translate that into, and what I'm really hearing is business reasons for security haven't been defined or communicated. Simple as that. Because you ever notice how funny it is that someone comes to you, oh, we don't have the budget, we don't have the skills, and then all of a sudden they have a big breach. And this is very prevalent in the UK. Then they get fined, and then the consultants are in, and all that costs a lot. And all of a sudden now they have all this money for security, and all the skills, they hire in the consultants and all that, and you know, so it is there, right? And a good example of this is there's a large UK financial institution that went to get, the security team went to get £60,000 to encrypt their laptops. So they didn't do a lot of mobile computing. So 60 grand would be the cost to do the whole everything. And it was rejected. So they didn't do it. Less than a year later, a laptop got stolen. They were fined by the FSA for no due diligence around what was on that laptop, encryption and all that. Post-mortem, you know, I was in there with a bunch of other consultants. That was millions. And then they were the joke of the industry. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, I'd go to a conference and they were up there, the butt of the jokes of the industry. And so during the post-mortem, I went in there and I got a hold of that £60,000 presentation done. And it was, to put it in UK terminology, it was rubbish. In American, it was garbage. It was crap. And it made it obvious. It was like, the problem wasn't, unfortunately, the director of security at the time got moved aside, kind of got scapegoated, blah, blah, blah. And actually, his only fault was he didn't present it well enough to convince his management to release those funds. That was the only issue. It wasn't that they didn't think about security, because he was dead on right that they needed to do it. So what I want to talk about is, well, you know, these are very common business case drivers in security. We see this everywhere. We saw it in this morning's keynote too, in terms of these will be recycled and they'll continue to go. First it'll be on compliance, then it'll be on governance, then it'll be on protection, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's the same type drivers. Right? So at one of our clients, and this is where I just had a brief conversation with Alex, I think it's Alex, right, from this morning, yep, where we were at a client and we weren't making much headway in terms of getting their development teams or testing teams to take on this whole security initiative within their everyday lives. And the test managers were just pretty much like, no. And that was it. And they were getting backed by their management. And so we really were struggling in terms of getting in there to get our security agenda that it wasn't enough to have internal audits say they had to do it. They weren't getting the backing. So we were looking through their documentation. They were talking about they build software. And they were talking about differentiating themselves in quality and the pride in quality and this and that. And so we went through, we started having conversations with them about quality and putting that into the security mix and just trying to get on his level. And so, yeah, we talked to him about this, and so we laid it out there with him. We said, okay, your app is vulnerable to SQL injection. We've proved it, here it is. Now, what is that? Is that a defect? Is that a quality issue? You tell me. I was talking to the testing team director, and we finally did come to an agreement that it was a quality issue because it was a defect within the software that allowed something that you didn't want or not expected to happen. And so now, all of a sudden, the inroads, we started doing integrating that into their quality management system, integrating it into, so marking security code like static code analysis findings as security defects, and now they're getting managed and maintained. And we brought that into the mix. And we did that through essentially translating it into business. And this slide is a lot for the non-security people out there. I think I'm preaching to the choir if I sit there and explain how to do this, how you should do this. But the quality in this is bringing it onto someone else's level, and mainly the people that release the funds. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You could be the most technically astute person around, but you're not going to get very far in an organization unless you have backing to do what you need to do. So the other side of the thing is doing a talk like this, I get to promote our products. And we have a application out there for you all to use, and I'll take orders afterwards. And what it is it's $19.99 for this application. And
no budget.
Sorry?
We don't have budget.
Well, you'll find budget, but what we do, right, is because it costs a little bit more to make it reliable, we're going to charge you $29.99 for it. And then if you want performance in there, it's going to be a bit extra, because now we got to do performance assurance and such. And I think I know, you know where I'm getting to on this one. And if you want it to be secure, then it's going to be, $49.99. And this just doesn't work. And this is another way you can actually push a security agenda and say, well, what are your customers expecting from you? So, and a great example of this is doing infrastructure reviews for a client, and we found out that their whole AIX environment was it was outsourced, and it wasn't locked down at all. So it was pretty much wide open. And so, your infrastructure is wide open, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, well, we better go talk to this company that's managing it for us and have them tighten this up. Okay, great. So we go and talk to them. We're sitting in meetings. The company comes back with a quote for like 25% of the cost of doing this outsourced service in order to secure it. And we just looked at it and we thought they were nuts, because it's no longer the time where you can charge extra for security, because now customers expect it. And I don't think anyone in this room or any non-security person would even consider a pricing model like this, especially for their banking application software or something. It's just not going to work. So in another area, and this is helping, like I said, all this is around convincing, right? Convincing the organization you work with, or if you're internal, the other parts of the organization, why we do this security thing, why we need to integrate security into the SDLC. Well, you can't get away from the old people process technology mantra of IT. You just can't. And it was fitting in this morning's talk that he said, we're not even going to talk about technology, because I'm not even going to talk about technology. Mainly because technology is great to automate a process, and it provides efficiency, right? But technology is useless if people don't know how to use it. And it can be dangerous, just downright dangerous. If, just think beyond security technology, just any technology, right, gets into the wrong hands. So you just take that out of the equation here, just knowing, you have it in your back pocket. That's a way to really gain efficiencies later on, and to help you do what you need to do. But it really comes down to people, right? And so when you're building software, right, these are kind of your generic activities. And so it's no surprise that all you have to do is add security in front of this. Right? And then those are your security activities around building software. And it's funny, I was out at a client and we were doing a project at the same time as this performance assurance project. And I looked at his presentations to management and such, and all you had to do was take out the word performance and put in security. And it was really, we could have just traded presentations, performance and design, performance, testing and such. So it's very much, an aspect of development. And I guess this is where I'm getting at, and this is great. I get to try this slide out on security professionals. And that is, during systems development, you have these methodologies, right, that are out there, and you have these activities that are kind of generic activities, within, so even if you do an Agile, you have to do some sort of planning. And we'll learn a little bit more about that on our talk tomorrow on Agile, security and Agile. But you still have to do some sort of these activities. And, these follow these methodologies. What about information security methodology? I guess, throw it out there to me, because I can't think of one. The methodology for doing information security. And now there's information security activities, and then within those you may have a methodology, but just information security, like systems development, there's a methodology. What about information security? Any takers? Or, and I guess this is what I'm getting at is there is in my mind there is no process for information security, because it's built in to whatever it is else that you're doing. And the sooner your clients and the sooner the people you're talking to in your organization understand that, the more it kind of kicks in that, oh, this is part of our everyday lives. This isn't something over here. It's actually, the old mantra, you have to bake it in, those words. And then what it comes down to as well is, I have to remind my clients that, security is independent. It doesn't matter what development method you're doing. And this is where I like to use, some of our test team guys as an example. Because not once, so for the testers out there, how many times have you thought, or even said across the room, or even heard someone go while they're testing going, I wonder how they developed this. I wonder which methodology they used for this app. They don't care. It doesn't matter what methodology you're using. It's irrelevant from a security standpoint. And someone asked me one time, I've been told that Agile is inherently insecure. And it's like, no, it isn't. It's no more inherently insecure than waterfall. And then going through the explaining that it doesn't matter what you're doing, it's just adding security in as part of what you're doing. And so how do we do that? Well, there's many frameworks that are out there that you can help define these activities within some sort of a framework and build security into your development process. So, for example, you have the Microsoft SDL, OWASP, which is combined now with OpenSAM, software assurance. Gary McGraw has his building security in. These kind of focus around activities that you can do while you're developing software and build it into your methodologies. And so this is more of a, and again, I do stress activities, because these aren't methodologies per se. They're activities that may have defined methodologies underneath them, but you just build those into what you're doing. And then you can start measuring how you're doing once you have that common set of activities. And so what we get a lot from our business, and I kept this slide in from a talk I've had last year, because it also demonstrates again how young this is, right? So clients will be like, well, what does it look like? How do we understand? How do we manage this? Well, what is this? What are we talking about? Right? And we've heard it so many different variations of what this is called. This alone is enough to cause major confusion among clients. And so I had a client that actually, we were under the SDLC project. And so you go into development teams and say, yes, I'm here for the SDLC project. The confusion that gets started right there is enough to waste a half a day in trying to explain what it really is. So either way, it's just another example of, it doesn't matter what you call it and such, it's just really those activities, building it in. And so, again, we talk about these activities under here that come under these practices. And this is an excerpt from the software assurance maturity model. And these are things, I'll come back to this, and I'll come back mainly around this testing area because it's something that everyone can identify. But again, an example of a framework where you can pull out activities that align to a development method. And so the way we see that is, say, take a generic waterfall, or this is actually built off of a Prince2 methodology. And you can see where these information security are just tasks, they're activities within the whole framework, so they fit right in. Preaching to the choir, aren't I? To a lot of you. And so I thought this was an interesting slide, because what we're doing here is we're taking a testing life cycle, and it had nothing to do with security. It was all about the testing life cycle, and it was mainly from the development world. And what we did is just mapped in the activities that we had talked about. So while you're testing requirements, well, have your security requirements been derived? Have they been noted and given to the teams? We'll test the design, right? Design and architecture reviews. Coding, right? Static code analysis, or Veracode type stuff on the source, and then somewhere in between here, dynamic testing, pen testing, and such. And then once out in maintenance, pen testing as well, as you do changes and such. And this is, to me, a good example that hits home with a lot of, this is geared towards test teams, but it hits home, it gives an example that it's not something different that we're doing. It's still the same methodology around developing software. It's just we're building in security activities into that.
Before do you mind if I interrupt this?
Yeah, go for it.
If I can say this at the end.
Is it relevant to this, or do you want to say?
Well, I was just going to ask you about if there were decent security requirements, I don't want to use the word templates, or directions that you can point folks to that were open and reusable, but stuff that you like.
Oh, so you mean like standard non-functional requirements to give to a project? You mean like that?
Well, how do you express your requirements? So in a project that I recently took this year, I created a huge list of what I thought were good security requirements. It shall not do this, it shall not do that, it shall not do this, it shall not do that. It should expect, this should be an expected behavior, that should be an expected behavior. Unexpected behavior is our security problems, blah, blah. And it just didn't sink in. This was a hotshot Rails, MacBook welding, agile group. And so I'm wondering, and I took a little heat in my group because I just made my own.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
And it was like, we want you should have documentation and some other thing. I was like, well, this should have been good enough for them. But if you want me to say, okay, this is an OWASP, whatever it is, I was wondering if you had template recommendations for creative requirements.
The consultant's answer to that is going to be, because it's so different on where we go, and it's a very cultural thing, I've found, and we're going to get to this in a minute, where you go, that you have to find those buttons to push that get the response you need. So going down the route of developing those requirements in the first place is like a big jump that a lot of organizations haven't even done yet. But then it's how you present those and how you correlate it into the rest of their development methodology, and then tie it into the policy and standards, which is tough. And then it's just a political match from there.
Easy man's excuse you saying, I want somebody else to do the science, rather than what I described to you as I had an art. Right? I was an artist. I was a security artist painting this picture, right? Versus I want science behind it, but I don't want to do that with itself.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So in short, I don't have any templates, so to speak, and such. The only thing I could say is, to me, it just sounds more like a political conversation to have, to get them to understand what it is you're really trying to do in the end. And then you're going to have to cut some deals, you know, and be like, okay, well, what about this? What about that? It's what I'm going to get to is probably the hardest part, and why most initiatives like this fail, which is where I'm going to get to.
My solution is bringing a consultant.
Yeah, which helps.
Like, oh, no, we're paying this guy to be smart, if you don't believe me.
Yeah, no, and it helps too. I've got a good war story on that, but I should crack on. So, one of the things you might hear is, right, compliance, blah, blah, blah. Well, I guess one of the things I don't like hearing is when companies talk about compliance as the goal, right? You know, the whole checklist thing, and the reason why we're doing security is for compliance. Because in the end, compliance is more of an output. It's the icing on the cake of good security/risk management. And so if you're doing that, then by default you should comply. And so one of the things that I wanted to glean out here is, by adding in these security processes, you could talk to your organization and say, look, just by simply doing this, you're going to comply to these regulations that you don't know much about. The only challenge to you is how you evidence it, and then we can work on that. And so it's a good thing to take to people in your organization. So we talked about kind of the business drivers and everything in theoretical, which is great, but actually, how do we do this, right? You know, people want to know, well, how do we do this? And you know, you can't get around it. Is you have to get some sort of funding, management commitment. And again, how you do that is going to take some creativity within your organization, depending on how they are. And then what it comes down to, it's people and skills. That's pretty much the only way you're going to be able to achieve integrating security into the SDLC. And we're going to move into that a little bit right here. So, a lot of places I've been to, you have your security team over here and your business over there. Okay, that's a given. But then, if you've ever done something like ISO benchmarking, ISO 27001 benchmarking, or any type of security audit that's around like a security management and such, or say you want to do an initiative around security architecture around the network, and then security, and then you go into the organization, you're like, all right, who do I talk to? And it may be you, but it's like that one person, right? And so it's like, okay, well, who do I talk to about network security? Oh, it's, you know, Bob. Great. So who do I talk to about antivirus patch management? Oh, that's Bob as well. Okay, well, what about with projects and security? Oh, that. So you have like 2 or 3 security people over here, and they're too busy to really focus on anything. And then you have the business over there who thinks security is rocket science, and so they try to stay away from it as much as possible. And this, to me, is the main reason why these initiatives fail. Because where are your security skills? You know, are you using those effectively? You know, so you're, you know, it was mentioned this morning. A lot of focus in the security world is on the technical teams, right? So your security team are, you know, deep technical security people, which is great, but they like to test and they like to break things. You know, how motivated are they going to be to jump over into the business to actually now be the ones designing security and letting someone else try to break it and get around it and then test them on their designs? And that's a huge challenge, you know. So the answer is, and it's not the silver bullet answer, but the answer is, you know, get them working together. So find out where your security skills are and use those in the business. And a good example of this is development teams. We're working with a client where we took one of their security people from the security team that was doing solely pen testing, but he had a developer background. He just got bored of it. And asked him, would you like to go and work with the developers and work on secure development? And told him the benefits of combining the two skills, blah, blah, blah. He went over there, he sits in the same room with the developers, and now they'll work on things. And someone will just look up and be like, hey, I'm working on this, blah, blah, blah. Oh, go over to this library, grab this bit, it's already done. And then it's solved. A potential security vulnerability has been, eliminated from that application. And that was very effective at this, particular client. It worked for them. Another great story is that at a client, I was walking through the architectures group, and for some reason, enterprise architect people and security people don't mix. And I don't know why, I can't figure it out, but everywhere I go, it's like this, right? And so I'm walking through the architecture section after a, bombed out meeting with the head of the architecture teams who said he didn't want anything to do with what we were doing. And I see a CISSP book on a desk. And so I walked up to the guy and I was just like, oh, hey, are you a security person? I noticed this book here. And his response directly was, well, I'll edit it a little bit, was, no, I'm studying and taking the test because I'm tired of those effing security people telling me that I can't effing do this and do that. And so his motivation for learning security was because his security team annoyed him so much, telling him no, 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 that he's like, I'm going to learn this myself so I can tell them yes, And it just hit. It was like, that's a perfect example of how you can bring those teams together. We talk about, oh, well, it'd be great to have a security architect, but how many organizations really do have security architects built into their teams? And I would say the clients I've been to, less than 5%. And therefore, security initiatives around integrating it into whether it's a secure architecture or a secure system fails. What happens is the same old thing. They develop something, they get it tested, then they're told they can't go live until they fix it. Political argument happens, they go live anyway. Right? It's usually how it happens. I'm not cynical, am I? So, another great excuse we get is, oh, well, we don't have a development methodology, so we can't really do this initiative. So the answer is, well, you're doing something. Like I've not gone into, well, okay, maybe one or two, but usually you don't go into places and find out that nobody is designing a system, that nobody is, checking code out of some sort of code repository, working on it, checking it back in, making sure then they have some sort of requirement that at least has to compile before it can go be tested. So they're doing something. They're not calling it a methodology. So what we say is like, I don't care what you're doing, just do something with security activities involved. And then that's a great starting point. Then as you kind of get the hang of it, then you can build in metrics and all that. So you don't have to start out day one with your framework and all your metrics and everybody go, but you can at least start somewhere. And yeah, you can't get away from measure. And so, COVID did a very good thing where they integrated the old CMMI-ish type ratings of the maturity of controls. Well, you could do the same thing to these activities that you're building in. So whether you're using, Microsoft SDL activities, OpenSAM, whatever, you could still define these activities within the process, determine what they are, measure how they're being done in the results. So you can actually, apply this to more than just CMMI and COVID type thing. Right, so let's talk about some of the problems that you'll create. Because, right, anytime you venture on something new or try to convince an area to do something different, you'll run into problems. So one of the first things we did, and this is more around integrating increased security testing, which included static code analysis. And what happened is, it was like the days when you just put in an IDS and you hit go and then the dashboard just lights up. And then what happens is, you let the wrong people see that and they start freaking, right? Like, oh my God, and then you have to explain to them everything and tune it and such. Well, the same thing is when you introduce more testing, more security criteria within someone's method, you're going to get more defects. You're going to get more security vulnerabilities. And then it's, well, you can actually plan for when this happens. And you could talk to your development teams and you could talk to your management about, yes, this is going to happen and this is what we're going to do. And right here, like, don't beat anyone up. And because what it comes down to is, usually, like in the static code analysis case, the developers just bore the brunt of it all. Management, how can you let this happen? You're not doing, And it used to be the IT administrators, right? We used to go in and tell them, your Unix is wide open, you have holes in your firewall, this, that. And the administrator's like, look, we just need to keep this stuff running. We don't know that. And then, and then the morale goes down and such. And, so don't beat anyone up. And this, a good story is back, unfortunately in the day, I was an IT auditor, and I would do the security around the systems that generated the financial statements and their operational transactions. And so we came in one year, a whole list of issues around their AIX environment that was supporting SAP. And told them, based on that, you have increased risk around SAP and its infrastructure. Okay, year 2, came back, found the same issues. Year 3, came back, found the exact same issues. And finally it came to a head. They had a new head of IT come in and ask the security team at the time, whose job was more user provisioning and access control, rather than the security that we may think of in terms of testing and mitigation and vulnerability management and such like that. And so they're like, look, we're not trained to do this and such. His immediate reaction, gone. This was obviously in the US where you could do this, but the whole team, done. See you later, and hired a new team. But it was, in my opinion, it was wrong reaction. Why not set out a security strategy and then retool them to do what they needed to do and understand it, rather than call them a security team when they were really user provisioning. They could have been on the help desk, rather than a security team. You're going to really glean out where your skills gap is. So, for example, if you're in an organization and you don't have security people within the development, the architecture teams and such, then it's going to become even more apparent, and you're going to highlight this to everybody, which could be a good thing and a bad thing. Then it's, well, how do you manage that? You have to, so one way to plan for it is, I guess a hard lesson I learned with the client was we developed methodology around a lot of things within these activities. So a methodology around static code analysis, around threat modeling, around secure design architecture reviews and such. And we worked with them. And the whole time, we didn't actively hard enough say, well, what are you going to do with this when we leave? What are you going to do with this? And really make that a high item on our agenda. We just asked it, and they're like, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it, our security teams. And then it got to the point where it was the end, and they had nobody to operate and run these methodologies that we created into their teams. And so what happened is it ended up sitting for about 6 months. They didn't do a thing with it. And it's really demoralizing from a consultant standpoint, because you spend a year of your life working with them, you want to see it succeed, and then this happens. But luckily we were able to get out there, address it, and get the teams going on there. But that was, they had this gap where they didn't see the benefit, they didn't realize the benefit of the activity, because they didn't have the skills in place to do it. And this is where I mean, that's kind of a touchy subject with a lot of testers out there. Because I have a colleague, he likes to say, his favorite question is to pen testers is, what's your favorite vulnerability, right? And then the further question would be, so what's that look like in code, And usually you don't get an answer. But they could get an answer because it's not that far of a jump to be a breaker and between a breaker and a fixer. And so this is what we stress with our clients: is take your testers out and challenge them over here in some other areas, and see how that works with the business. And in our experience, it's worked well. They actually enjoyed getting out of the lab, some of the guys. You're going to realize, and this is kind of what I just talked about, there's going to be a resource gap, right? Because there's a perception out there that now that you understand, right, you've done more testing, you've uncovered more defects, vulnerabilities, whatever you want to call them, so now you can't ignore it, you have to manage it. That's a perception. It's not always the case, right? People would still rather just ignore them and bury them over here and say, then they talk about, well, how do we quantify the risk and everything. We get into some of the other talks today about risk management and quantification and stuff. But in the end, at least now you know what's out there. The phrase ignorance is bliss. Well, it's not bliss anymore because now you know that there's stuff out there and it needs to be managed. And this is probably the biggest one, and this is what I was getting at, is you're going to run into political battles in most organizations. And really it just comes down to age-old behavioral things, such as managing change within an organization. So you go to a development team leader and tell them their development team has to now operate in have to modify slightly what they're doing. The first thing you get is, I have timelines, I have this, I have that. It can't happen. That's the first thing you'll get. And then it's, well, how do we manage that? How do we, and that's the awareness. And there's a lot of, political and behavioral things around that. And it's tough, dealing with, middle management, because they're the most vulnerable in an organization, right? Like, they're the ones that are even more so trying to amass people under them and do well, with whatever their task is, and they don't want people to come in from the side and either upstage them or, completely, move them in a different direction, and then them fearing negative feedback later. It's a huge problem, I believe, and it's just the perceptions and the pushback around that. And I think that's what you highlighted in your question before about, how do I get my security requirements that communicated in a way that they'll take them seriously and do them and consider them. And a lot of it's around this, that pushback and dealing with that. So really that's it. I think I have about 9 minutes left, which would be good for any questions, comments, war stories, anything out there. And we have first hand in the back.
Do you have a take on what Bartoldus from HP says about how we already have a perfectly good model for improving software development, which is the QA process? And if we incorporate security based on bugs and tickets, the QA team is already quite successful, and we just need to use that language.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that person and such, but I'm very familiar with HP and the way they're going to market around their web inspect, and they've just bought Fortify software, and they're integrating it all into their, IBM's doing the same thing, right? They're bought Ounce and AppScan and such. So conceptually, I agree. And it comes around to the testing, and he's talking about that testing slide where, inject testing, push it back to your test teams, and, talk to them about quality and stuff. So I agree with that. And I'm not sure about, it's already there and such like that, because yes, it's already there, right? Most organizations that develop software will test it. It's just, from a security standpoint, what are the requirements, and test to those requirements. And, so for example, the question about the list of requirements going out to the teams, well, now you can build your test cases around those requirements. just like you build test cases around functional requirements. And then you could test them and then you can get results out of that. So I agree conceptually with them. Whether companies are already there, they may be in terms of testing, QA testing, but not from a security standpoint, I don't believe.
No, I was going to say that regarding the template, there is the Microsoft SDLC template for Visual Studio team system. So it might be something you want to integrate. Maybe something, the thing you are to the template, Microsoft has an SDLC template. You can take a look at that. There's also documentation there. You can take. And my question for you is, based on your experience, which framework people are using most? I mean, Microsoft, OWASP, which one?
Coming from the Microsoft guy. I would say that I guess it's a function of I'm very biased because we're brought into a client for a specific reason because they haven't done this yet. So therefore, we talk to them about both software assurance, the OWASP, and we talk to them about Microsoft as well because our organization, we've integrated kind of both together. So I can't really say, my perception is that the Microsoft has more ground in the industry because it's very comprehensive, very easily accessible, and some great tools around it. So I would say that's just a perception I have, but I can't really tell you because most of the clients we go to, we're called because they don't have anything in place. But yeah, so that's it. And especially if they're using .NET, then it's almost like automatic. They go there and use some of the activities. And you actually just reminded me of another requirements thing about deriving requirements is, the Microsoft methodology around threat modeling. Threat modeling is something that really helps derive specific requirements per application. It's kind of a bit different than the presentation this morning talking about threat assessment. This is more specific for building an application. But that'll really, and there's tools behind it, and Simon could probably talk forever about it, but we found that to be a good tool for deriving further requirements after the general ones, the specifics. Yeah.
New question. Beyond outcome-based metrics like number of defects in the code, and so forth, what evidences would you try to collect that a software development team is actually good?
I had a good answer until you said actually good, because that's very subjective and I don't think can be really quantified. But some other metrics that can be used to help ensure your teams have been trained, or at least
qualitative descriptions as well, and say, high, medium, low, whatever. But I'm just looking for, most of the time when you see a metrics program around software security,
it's really number of defects.
Okay, well, we've done these 10 projects, and the number of vulnerabilities, the black hat testing at the end is,
going down.
Findings are going down, so therefore we're doing a great job. And that may or may not be so. I guess what I'm wondering though is if you look at individual performance and so forth, can you do something beyond just those specific outcomes to describe their performance?
What we've worked with one client on was going through a secure development certification track to where you had to take certain courses, pass a test, and go along to get certified as a secure development lead within that organization. But they had many developers all over the place, and so it made a lot of sense for them to do that. And what that did was, it doesn't really, certification doesn't tell you whether you're good or not, but at least gave them secure assurance that they were going through formal training and were able to take that back to the test teams. But ultimately, it comes down to quantifiable metrics like, number of defects found during static code analysis, number of defects found during dynamic testing or QA testing versus number of defects found post-release, vulnerabilities. So it's hard to get away from those numbers in terms of performance measuring, but as far as being how are my development teams good? How are they compared to, are my developers more security savvy than this organization? I just don't really have an answer for that, unfortunately.
Oh, it's fine. No answer is an answer.
Just to respond to Alex's question, I know of some companies that contract with services like White Hat or maybe Blue Coat or some of the other scanners to sort of prove up their development fact. So we say we're really great, validated with third party. Maybe, I don't know, that those kind of people would tell you how you stack up generally against others in your industry. Is Chris hanging in your work? I mean, he would be able to address that.
And I think it comes down to, because we work with our clients on that too, but it's still just a measurement based on the results of testing or verification. And so, those are the numbers that management responds to the most is, because you can even say, oh, our developers have been through training, and then the first thing they want to say is, well, what are we getting out of it? Are the number of vulnerabilities going down? And then you have to show them results from tests. And yeah, Veracode and other type of testing is quite valid in that area.
Well, just to follow on, I've kind of come to the conclusion that if you actually succeed in removing all reported defects, so that what you're really dealing with is 0 to 8, I think you have to effectively consider that good.
Yeah, because, it's a moving target. You think you may have everything, and then 2 days later...
Yeah, something comes out, sure, but you can't control, you can't code for that, you can't train for that.
Yeah, all right. So I think that's about it. Hopefully you have a few things you could take away from that, at least when you're talking with inside your organizations or your client, or at least something to look out for.